Pressing this button.
Yep. I'll just get your preso up. Hang on. Yes. And let's see that. Hang on.
Looks good.
Slideshow from beginning. Should be it. Yeah, that's you. Righto. So forward.
Forward.
Back.
I shouldn't need to go back.
There you go. I'll just put your name up there.
Okay.
Righto, I will. What's the time? Okay, everyone, welcome to our second last session. I've just realised after watching Louise speak so well that I don't need to do this. Probably can just stand up, can't I? So I'm pretty excited about these last two sessions from a very selfish and personal reason. The last two sessions are being delivered by people that are all from the golden part of Australia, some of the most amazing landscape in Australia. So Ian Perkins is from Durrumbandi. I'm from Hebel. Will, who's in the next session, is from Mungandai originally, and we're all from that same part of the world. Beautiful rivers and creeks, and a lovely part of the world. It's Kamilaroi country out there. So these next two sessions, Ian first, and then Wilbur, are coming to you from southwest Queensland, I suppose. So Ian, our next speaker, I'm pleased to welcome him to the stage. He's going to be presenting on his own this time. Cassie Stevens was going to be presenting with Ian, but unfortunately she couldn't be here, and that's a real shame because I was out with Ian's group at west of Mount Isa, and Cassie spoke at basically a waterhole, and she is smart as paint, brilliant woman, First Nations lady, doing some really great work. So it's a shame she can't be here, but Ian will present their story very well. So Ian manages the NB2 Indigenous group up in Queensland. NB2 is an MLA-driven program of work, and the Indigenous group that Ian works with, they manage around about 4 million hectares of grazing land in Queensland. So Ian's going to come to the stage and speak to that program of work. So thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Ange. And I'm sure everyone knows where Hebel is. It's it's a big town on the border, just a bit north of Lightning Ridge. So I'm Ian Perkins, and I facilitate the Northern Beef or NB2 Indigenous project. Cassie couldn't be here, so I'll just introduce her in her absence. So Cassie's a member of because it's just quite an interesting story. She's a member of the Cullowhee Bulla River Aboriginal group. They bought Thargomindah Station, which is a large pastoral station on the Bulla River right there at Thargomindah, with funding from a social enterprise group, and that funding is paid off through a carbon project. So here's an Indigenous group who've just bought their own property through a really innovative funding system and a really innovative paying off system. They've got the title, they're managing it, they've got cattle on it, and it'll be paid off in 25 years. So it's just a really interesting story. So the NB2 group, it's a group of Indigenous land managers and cattle operators. It's been running for about 4 years. It's funded by MLA, ILSC, Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation, and Animal Health Australia. And we look like going into another 4 years where it'll be funded by MLA, Queensland DPI, ILSC, Landcare Australia, and Southern Gulf and Gulf Savannah NRM bodies. So it's the group at the moment comprises there's about 12 participating members, and they range from Maripara up the top there near Cowan to Cassie's Place, which is Thargomindah right down the bottom, and all in between. You know, there's a couple of big ones at Mount Isa, there's Delta at Normanton, and then a number down the middle. And they range in size and scale and type of enterprise. So Delta Downs is a big place. It runs about 45,000 head of cattle. Carlton runs about 20,000 head. And then there's a number of others that are smaller that make most of their income through agistment or through leasing their country out. And then there's Mirrapara and Thargomindah who derive income from carbon projects from savanna burning or human-induced regeneration. So there's a real diversity in the people present. It's you can see it in the landscapes. That's my favourite place. That's on the Diamantina at a place called Diamantina Gate. So the group own, as Ange said, the group own and manage about 4 million hectares. They run about 80,000 head of cattle and employ over 100 people. The group over the time has built a really solid level of social capital and really high levels of trust. And there's a number of reasons for this, in my opinion anyway. So the group is really strongly driven by the group. The group drives the agenda, they drive the process. As a facilitator, I respond to what the group wants to do, so they run it. And I've been really strict with myself, making sure that that's what happens. We've had strong engagement and support of elders right from the beginning. That's how we established the group, by talking to elders involved in land management and cattle management. And they've retained involvement, so that's been really, really important. The other important thing is residential workshops. We hold workshops that run for about 4 or 5 days, and generally in a regional centre close to one of the properties belonging to a participant organisation. So we've had workshops in Corumba, Croydon, Chillagoe, Ingham, Mount Isa, places like that, and we do field work on the local properties. And we make sure that those where we stay, we can share meals. There's a lot of time for informal interaction, and that's played a really big role in building the social capacity. And it's also followed direction. That's how they wanted to do it, and that's how we're doing it. There's a strong education and training component. Once again, we respond to the group, but we have specialists come along, like Bush Agribusiness, who talk about business management. We have Dione Walsh, who talks a lot about pasture management and land management. So we respond to the group, but there's a strong educational component. The other thing that the group really value is a reintegration with the cattle industry. 60 years ago, every Northern Australian cattle station was really integrated with Indigenous people. That has largely disappeared now. And so these properties, these Indigenous communities were operating on their own. And you go to a cattleman's workshop and there's not a blackfella there, you know. So we wanted to change that, and they've been involved with MLA, with specialists, with other people who work within the industry. And the Indigenous organisations have really valued that reintegration back into the Australian cattle industry. And it's providing benefits in a whole lot of different ways. We've engaged with technology in a really interesting way. We've used virtual reality to develop a disease identification tool. It can be used in remote communities, so you can put a headset on, you can walk amongst a mob of cattle that'll be showing different symptoms of disease, and then you can use a differential diagnosis approach to identify what disease those animals have got. We also use that for biosecurity tours, also for training in post-mortem. So we've used virtual reality for those sort of things. And we've developed a thing that we're calling Campfire Chat, which is really a way of recording storytelling and replaying that in a virtual reality format. So we've set up a virtual reality campfire, so people can put a headset on, they can be wherever they like, and they're all avatars sitting around a campfire sharing stories and recording information. As the project goes forward, we're going to integrate that all through the project. So we work with DPI, and DPI want pretty significant feedback project evaluation, and I said, well, we're not going to do that with writing, so we'll do it orally. So we're going to do it orally using virtual reality and using Campfire Chat. So the virtual reality tool, you know, eventually we're going to develop a Campfire Indigenous Chat GBT, something like that. So we'll use the large language model to put information in and to make that information accessible. Every participant member will have headsets, and they'll have cameras and ways to upload information and headsets to access information. So it's really taking advantage of the Indigenous propensity for storytelling, a really strong level of engagement with the group and high levels of trust, and some really advanced technology. So that's what we'll be doing in the next sort of 4 or 5 years. The other thing we've done with the group is we've collected a lot of data on productivity, on business management, And the group, because we've built that level of trust, the group have been really happy to share that information. So we'll come along to a meeting, Delta will share all their information on productivity and their basic financial information, and the group then will work together to develop strategies on how they might improve that. So it's led to some really great interaction, like Cassie's mob from Thargomindah don't have much cattle expertise, but they really value the opportunity to be involved with Delta, who have significant cattle expertise. And it works the other way. Delta don't have any carbon expertise. Cassie's mob have really good expertise with carbon. So it works really well, and the level of trust that we've built enables some really detailed information sharing. And we'll continue with that as we go on. We had a meeting at the end of the last workshop and looked at identifying future priorities. And one of the biggest priorities was land condition. So land condition across the north of Australia is deteriorating significantly. And Indigenous land managers are really aware of that, and they've got a very strong caring for country ethic. So we're looking at how we're going to address that. And one way probably will be to reduce cattle, improve productivity, reduce numbers and get the same turnoff from a smaller number, and see what impact that will have on land condition. One of the other things, the group are really interested in getting involved in management of land for environmental outcomes, and that's the project we've got with Landcare Australia going forward. We're looking at integrating biodiversity with productivity on different properties. Most of these properties are really large, and they have significant conservation values as well as livestock productivity values. So on Carlton there's the Carpentaria grass wren, on Bulimba and a number of other places there's golden-shouldered parrots. The Mythica mob down at Windora reckon that they kick night parrots out of the way at night time, but I'm not sure about that. But there are really strong conservation values on a lot of these properties, and in the long run, the group that I work with, they manage 4 million hectares, and there's got to be ways of working together to derive income, employment, training out of management of Indigenous management of biodiversity and environmental values. So that's one of the sort of core things they're looking at, and that's one of the things we've been talking to Landcare Australia about. On the broader scale, across Australia, Indigenous pastoral properties manage about 300, I've left a nought off the end of that, 300,000. So it's not 30,000, it's 300,000. So that's at the level of some of the larger scale pastoral companies. So that's the sort of number that is being managed by Indigenous pastoral properties across Australia. Employ over 200 people, and they're responsible for management of 8 to 10 million hectares of land. And as I said, a lot of those properties and landscapes have really strong conservation values. So I really think there's really significant opportunities, and a number of, like Bush Heritage and Australian Wildlife Conservancy, are working with Indigenous communities at the moment. But there is significant potential to increase that and to work with some of that sort of scale to achieve the aims and aspirations of most of these communities are around access to country, caring for country, employment, education, training, that sort of thing. So it's cattle, it's management for biodiversity, it's management for environmental outcomes. One of the interesting things is the way Indigenous properties or Indigenous organisations own land. So they're community owned, and the community aspirations, as I said, are largely around sort of community benefits. So employment, education, training, access, caring for country. But the regulatory framework around Indigenous owned land also is important as well. So you can't mortgage Indigenous owned land. And so that makes it really significantly different to corporate and family-owned country. Most family-owned country, they want to increase the value of the assets so they can borrow more against it, or maybe sometime in the future they want to sell it. Indigenous communities never want to sell their land, and there's not a lot of point in increasing the value of it in terms of mortgage, because they can't mortgage it. But they want to keep it, they want to care for country. So put that together with the opportunities that they have, and I think the opportunities across a large scale are pretty significant. One of the other things that the group is really interested in is recognition of their knowledge. So a two-way flow of information. And I think that's the sort of thing that we want to do with the Landcare Australia project. But it's also what they want to do with long-term management for environmental outcomes, is look at sharing information, look at contributing and looking at some recognition of what they can offer. So that's really about it. I'm interested in answering any questions. I'm also interested in exploring ways that we might be able to facilitate. One of their main aim is how can we manage across a number of different enterprises for environmental and biodiversity outcomes, and generate income for the Indigenous communities that own the land, and generate employment, education, training, those sort of opportunities. So that's probably a question that I would pose, and if anyone's got any answers or any contribution to that sort of thing, then I'd be welcome, and the group would be interested in hearing that.
Thanks very much, Ian. Is this thing working? It is. Okay. Thanks, Ian. And we're really happy at Landcare Australia and the Landcare Ag program to be working with this project over the next 3 years. It's an interesting example of collaboration, because I know Doug Human, who's at the back of the room here, Doug's been working with Ian and some of these groups up in Queensland for how long now, Doug? 10 years? I don't know. Quite some time, and the collaboration continues. So now we've got the Biodiversity in Action project, and we're looking to see a two-way flow of information and support, a lot of support from our end towards, Ian's group and these groups all around Queensland. So let's open up the floor to questions and ideas for Ian.
Thanks so much, Ian. I'm sorry, I don't have an answer for you, but I do have a question. You spoke about the virtual reality and looking at kind of a ChatGPT AI model. This morning we heard some discussion about Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. So I was wondering if you had any, discussions or reflections on the intersection of that IP and virtual reality in your instance.
Yeah, no, we haven't had those discussions, but I've thought about it a lot, and I've had those discussions informally, but not as a group. And like everything else the group does, we'll just be totally led by the group. So, it is really important. And I just finished reading Nicholas Rothwell's book, Yulkari, and he talks a lot there about access to information. And Sam was talking this morning about access to information, and it's so important. So I agree, it's something we're going to have to address. And I sort of think that the way we'll address it will be totally led by the group. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian. Bruce, one of the things that's been talked about a lot at this conference is I suppose, the grab for money and the difficulty involved. Well, kind of a bit of an economics background, I sort of look a bit more broadly, and so I see there's probably a opportunity there in the tourism market for ecotourism and cultural tourism. I think that could be an avenue to branch out into and look at camping grounds and huts and programs that are actually geared up for whether it be the grain nomads or the school groups to come and absorb that bit of that culture and then take it back to the city where they're involved with electorates and members of parliament and the money tree.
Yeah, one of the things that we want to use the virtual reality for, like, I just spent a fair bit of time with the Mythica mob out at Windora and Batuta this year and last year, and they took us on a tour of their landscape, and you go out to Batuta and it's, as a white fellow you think, geez, this is hard country, but you walk around with people who know what they're looking for, and there's just signs of occupation just every step you take.
Any more questions?
So I'll just continue with that. One of the Mythica mob want people to access that landscape without treading on it, because everywhere you tread, there's something there. And so that's what we're going to use part of this storytelling for. So you may be able to go into a library at Windora and get a tour of the Mythica country and a tour of all the really important sites just by putting your headset on. without needing to go there and walk across it.
Hi Ian, great to see what you're doing there. Just congratulating Margie Milgate here. Just wondering if you're looking at any other enterprises rather than just cattle. You're in lots of things. There's interest in bush foods, there's interest in different things, horticulture, grains used to be in the central deserts. You know, there's just new work going in all of those areas. I'm just wondering whether the groups are opening up to other enterprises rather than just cattle.
Yeah, they certainly are, and just on a lighter note, one of the mobs is developing a thing called a fertiliser, which you put feral pigs into, and you come out with a fertiliser at the end. So that's not quite what you're talking about, but it's a different enterprise. So it's funded at the moment by MLA really strongly. So it's got a livestock focus to start with, and all the participant members are on pastoral properties. But there are a number of other enterprises they're considering, and part of what we do is discuss that as a group. So they bring up these different ideas and discuss it as a group. So there's carbon, and biodiversity management is a really big part of it. We haven't looked at anything like the grains that you're talking about or other enterprises like that. There's one mob that are looking at, the Delta mob are looking at aquaculture because they're in a Barramundi area. So there are a number of other enterprises. The funding probably would more look at if we do have a group that's interested in, say, developing a Barramundi farm, well then we've got to find somewhere else for them to go to find that sort of funding.
Lachlan McBride, Serena Land Care. Sorry. I was just going to, one of my questions was, where does your beef go? Is there enough market like sales or like especially up the north, where does your cattle go from when they're like, do they take them off as weaners and grow them out, or what do you do there?
Yeah, and they go to some of them go to live export, most of them go south, and they do come off mainly as weaners because they're mostly grower properties. Most of the Indigenous communities haven't ended up with the actual prime beef producing country in Australia, so it's breeding country mostly, and they go off. So they mostly head south. But one of the things that some of the group members are interested in doing is trying to cooperate and work together. So there's a lot of really good finishing country, or there's some good finishing country in central Queensland that belongs to Indigenous communities. And in the past, cattle from the north used to go there, but they don't at the moment. And if the Channel Country mob ever get some money together to buy a property, well then that's finishing country and breeding country in the north. So they're really interested in working together to produce maybe even an Indigenous branded product in the long run. But that's down the track.
Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks, Ian. I just wanted to share a quick story because people are interesting, aren't they? Ian Perkins became what he is doing today because when he was a kid, he used to read National Geographic, and he decided he wanted to work kind of with support people on the land and maybe in Africa and all over the place. And apparently his dad took him off to University of Queensland, and he went around and interviewed, I think, all the schools. Which degree shall I do so I can go and do that work? So, of course, he chose the hardest degrees, obviously smart and hard-working. He did vet, and he became a vet in Queensland at Charleville and different places. And I don't know how many countries he's worked in overseas, but Ian's done a lot of work over in Africa at least, I know.
Africa and Asia, yeah.
Yeah, and so isn't it an interesting story? And now we're lucky to have Ian back. He's got a passion for working with people and animals. So I just thought I'd share that story because it's a really interesting story. And we do talk sometimes too, that growing up where we grew up, which is Dirranbandi, Heeble-Gadooga area, we grew up in a really mixed culture. There were lots of blackfellas, whitefellas, we're all at school together and pony club together and working together. I know I look through it through a privileged white person's lens, but everyone seemed to get on really well, didn't they, Ian? Yeah. And so we find, being able to work and relate to First Nations people comes fairly naturally because we grew up around these people and we grew up respecting them. And we still both have a passion for working with First Nations people, but we're really thankful for that upbringing in that really sort of cross-cultural environment, didn't we, Anne? Anyway, I just thought I'd share the story of National Geographic and Anne becoming a vet. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Righto. Now, I think it's changed over time, so yeah, feel free. We won't think you're rude if you're leaving the room.